Welcome to this comprehensive course of literary translation. I'm Dr. Mohammed Elwishi from the London College of International Studies. Over the next 3 hours, we are going to explore one of the most challenging, rewarding, and culturally significant fields in language studies, literary translation. This is not just about converting words from one language to another, it's about bridging cultures, preserving artistic integrity, and creating new literary works that resonate with readers across linguistic boundaries, whether you are aspiring to become a professional translator interested in comparative literature or simply curious about how your favorite foreign novels reached you in your language, this course will provide you with the theoretical foundations, the practical strategies, and critical perspectives you need to understand and practice this vital art. Now let's move to the course outline. Introduction to Literary Translation, Chapter 1, Foundations of Literary Translation, the translator's role and competence, literary genres and their translation challenges. Chapter 2, Pedagogical Approaches to Teaching Literary Translation, Learning Activities and Exercises, Case Studies in Literary Translation, Technology and Literary Translation, Ethical and Cultural Considerations, challenges faced by literary translators, strategies for overcoming translation challenges, the importance of literary translation in language and market growth, assessment and evaluation in literary translation, education, resources for students, conclusion, and a call to action. Now let's move to learning objectives. Students will develop a comprehensive understanding of key theoretical approaches to literary translation, exploring frameworks that have shaped the field from ancient times to contemporary practices, learn to identify different types of literary texts from lyric poetry to experimental prose, and understand the unique translation demands each more presents to translators, develop sophisticated skills to analyze and critic translated works, evaluating how successful translators have balanced competing demands of accuracy, artistry, and accessibility, apply translation strategies in practice to preserve the style to cultural nuances of original works while creating compelling texts in the target language. Now let's move to learning outcomes. Students will articulate the role literary translation plays in cultural transmission, demonstrating understanding of how translated works shape cross-cultural dialogues that influence literary traditions worldwide. Students will demonstrate the ability to translate literary excerpts while maintaining the artistic integrity of the original, making informed decisions about when to prioritize literary accuracy versus creative adaptation. Since will critically evaluate published translations for both accuracy and creativity, developing the analytical skills necessary to access whether translation succeeds in capturing the essence of the original work. Students will engage in thoughtful reflection on the translator's ethical and cultural responsibilities, considering issues of representation, cultural appropriation, and the power dynamics inherent in translation. Now let's move to the introduction to literary translation. So, definition and scope. Literary translation encompasses the art and the craft of translating creative written works, including novels, poetry, drama, and essays from one language to another. Unlike technical or legal translation, literary translation demands both linguistic precision and artistic sensitivity, requiring translators to navigate the delicate a balance between staying faithful to the original text and creating something that resonates in the target language. This is the fundamental tension in all literary translation: fidelity versus creativity, accuracy versus artistry. Too much fidelity can produce a awkward, unnatural language that doesn't work as literature in the target language. Too much creative freedom can produce beautiful writing that betrays the original. The skilled translator navigates this tension with every sentence, finding the right balance for each specific text and context. Now let's move for unique challenges. The literary translators faces distinctive challenges that set this practice apart from other forms of translation. They must preserve not only meaning but also style, tune, rhythms, and the cultural nuances. Every word choice matters. As translator must decide whether to prioritize the beauty of the original language or the comprehensibility in the target language, often walking a tightrope tightrope, between creativity and fidelity. Let me give you an example. Imagine translating a text that uses very formal, archaic language. Do you preserve that formality in the target language, even if it makes the text harder or to harder to read, or do you modernize it for accessibility, even if you lose something of the original character? There is no single right answer. It depends on the text, the purpose of the translation, and the target audience. Now let's go to the importance in global culture. Literacy translation serves as a vital bridge, enabling cross-cultural literature and exchanges. It allows readers to create masterpieces from around the world, fostering empathy, understanding, and appreciation for diverse cultures. Throughout translation. The works of Garcia Marquez, Tolstoy, Morka, Murakami, and countless others have enriched global literature, proving that great stories transcend linguistic boundaries. These authors have influenced the writers worldwide, contributed to global literature conversations, and helped readers everywhere understand the human experiences more fully. Without translation, world literature as a category wouldn't exist. We would have separate, isolated literary traditions rather than the rich, interconnected global literary culture we enjoy today. Now let's move to chapter one. Historical overview. The practice of literary translation stretches back millennia, from ancient translators who brought Greek philosophy to Rome to medieval scholars who translates religious texts, to Renaissance humanities who revived classical literature. Each era has contributed to evolving standards and approaches, reflecting changing attitudes toward the language, culture, and the role of translator. Early translators often left felt free to adapt text extensively, adding their own commentary uh, and interpretations. Later periods emphasized fidelity and accuracy. Contemporary translation theory often seeks a middle path, recognizing both the translator's creative role and their responsibility to be original. Now let's go for uh, understanding This history helps us appreciate the debates about translation are not new. Translators have always grappled with questions of fidelity, interpretations, and the possibility of true equivalence between languages. The evolution of literary translation mirrors broader cultural and intellectual movements from colonialism's impact on translation practice to post-colonial theories, a challenge to traditional hierarchies. During colonial periods, the translation often served imperial purposes, translating Western texts into colonized languages to spread Western culture and values, while indigenous literatures were often dismissed as primitive or untranslatable. Now let's move to major translation theories. So contemporary translation theory offers several key frameworks for understanding the translator's task. The concepts of equivalence asks whether and how a translation can be equivalent to its source, whether in meaning, effect, or function. This seemingly simple question has generated extensive scholarly debate for decades. What does it mean for a translation to be equivalent to its source? Does it mean word for word correspondence? That's clearly impossible for literary texts. Languages structure meaning differently, and the word for word translation usually produces nonsense. Does it mean semantic equivalence, conveying the same meaning? That's closer, but meaning itself is complex. Denotative meaning is one thing, but what about connotative meaning, emotional resonance, cultural associations, and so on? So, domestication and differentiation. The tension between domestication and differentiation, articulated by Lawrence Vinotti, represents another crucial theoretical divide. The domestication makes translated texts and fluently in the target language, minimizing cultural differences. Foreignization preserves the foreign elements of the source text, challenging readers to encounter cultural otherness. A foreignizing translator might retain foreign words, preserve unusual syntax that reflects source language patterns, and include cultural references, even if they require explanation. The advantage is respecting cultural speciality and challenging readers to expand their horizons. The risk is creating texts that feel awkward, different, or difficult or alienating to target readers. Now let's go to the key translation terms: source language text, SL or ST. The original language and text being translated, the starting point of the translation process. Target language text or TLTT, the language and text being translated into the destination and the product of translation work. In interlingual translation, translation between two different languages as distinguished from intralingual within one language, or inter-semantic between science systems translation. So let's talk about the translator's role, cultural mediator, as Dr. Khatoufi said. Cultural mediator. The literary translator serves as a cultural mediator, navigating between two worlds and making countless decisions about how to represent one culture to another. This role carries significant responsibilities, and translators shape how foreign cultures and literatures are received by target audiences. They must possess deep cultural knowledge of both source and target contexts, understanding not just explicit content but implicit cultural references, historical allusions, and social nuances. If a source text references a historical event, that's common knowledge in the source culture but unknown in the target culture, the translator must decide how to handle this. Simple translating the reference might leave target readers confused, adding explanation might disrupt the text's flow, finding a cultural equivalent might change the meaning. Each choice shapes how target readers understand both the specific text and the source culture more broadly. The translator as creative artist. Translation is not merely mechanical reproduction, but a creative act requiring imagination, stylistic sensitivity, and often bold artistic choices. Translators must recreate the aesthetic qualities of the original, its rhythm, imagery, voice, and emotional impact using the resources of a different language. This creative dimension distinguishes literary translation from other forms of translating and demands that translators themselves possess literary talent and artistic vision. So a literary translator needs to not just language skills, but literary skills, the ability to write well, to hear rhythm and tune, to craft imagery, to create compelling narrative voices. Some of the greatest literary translators are also poets or novelists in their own right, bringing their own artistic talents to the translation process. Now let's go to competence framework. Successful literary translators develop a multifaceted competency framework encompassing linguistic skills in both source and target languages. Exists extensive cultural knowledge, including literature, history, and contemporary culture, and literary sensitivity to recognize and recreate stylistic nuances. Additionally, translators need research skills, problem-solving abilities, and the confidence to make difficult decisions when perfect solutions do not exist. So, which is most of the time? Translators must be comfortable with ambiguity and with making imperfect choices. Accepting that translation involves inevitable compromise, the competent translator develops a judgment about which compromises to make in which contexts. Now let's move to case study translating Garcia Marquez. The translation of Gabriel Garcia Marquez on 100 Years of Solitude into English by um, Gregory Rabassa is widely considered one of the most successful literary translations of the 20th century. Rabassa's work demonstrates how a skilled translator can capture not just the meaning, but the magic of the original, preserving Garcia Marquez's distinctive narrative voice and the novel's blend of reality and fantasy. Garcia Marquez himself famously said he preferred Rabassa's translation to his own original, highlighting the creative achievement possible in literary translation. This statement, while perhaps partly generous hyperbole, reflects genuine artistic accomplishment. Rapsels didn't just convert Spanish words into English equivalents. He created an English literary work that captures the essence of Garcia's Marquez's vision while fully inhabiting English as a language. Now let's move to literary genres and their translation challenges. Starting with poetry translation. Poetry, perhaps or poetry presents perhaps the greatest challenge to translators because so much of a poem's meaning resides in its form, meter, rhyme, line breaks, and sound patterns. When translating poetry, the translators must decide which elements to prioritize literary meaning, emotional resonance, formal structure, or sonic qualities. Some translators attempt to preserve the original metric and rhythm schemes, even if this requires departing from literal meaning. Others prioritize semantic accuracy and emotional impact while abandoning formal constraints. Many contemporary poetry translators favor free verse translating or translation that capture this spirit and imagery of the original without attempting to reproduce its formal features in a different linguistic system. They argue that formal equivalence is impossible. The same form means different things in different languages. And the literary traditions, a sonnet in English carries different associations and presents difficult and different challenges than a sonnet in Italian. Better to create target language poetry that works on its own terms while capturing the source poem's essential qualities. Now let's move to drama translation introduction. Translating dramatic texts requires the awareness that these works are meant to be performed, not just read. Dialogue must sound natural when spoken aloud, and translators must consider the physical and temporal constraints of theatrical performance, stage directions, cultural references, and wordplay, all present specific challenges. The translator must capture the distinctive voices of different characters, preserve the rhythm and pacing of dialogue, and ensure that jokes, puns, and verbal wit works in the target language. Additionally, drama translators must consider how their translations will function in performance, collaborating with directors and actors to ensure their formability. So, theater translation increasingly involves workshops where actors and translation or actors read translations aloud, helping translators hear what works reform their formatively and what needs a revision. This collaboration or this collaborative dimension distinguishes drama translation from other literary translation. Now let's move to prose translation. Prose fiction translation demands attention to narrative voice, stylistic consistency, and the complex web of cultural references embedded in novels and short stories. Translators must capture authorials or authors' distinction style, whether space or spare or ornate, formal or colloquial, straightforward or experimental. Challenges include handling dialect, representing characters speech patterns, translating culture-specific elements like food, customs, or social structures, and maintaining the narrative pace and tone. The translator must also navigate longer works consistency while making thousands and thousands of micro decision about word choice, sentence structure, and paragraph rhythm that collectively create the reading experience. A novel might be hundreds of pages with hundreds of thousands of individual words choice. Maintaining consistency across such lengths while keeping each sentence effective requires remarkable concentration and skill. Now let's move to chapter two, pedagogical approaches to teaching literary translation, process-oriented education. Modern translation pedagogy emphasizes the translation process rather than just the final product. Students learn by doing, working through translation problems systematically, documenting their decisions and reflecting on alternative choices. And instead of just producing a translation and being told whether it's a good or bad, students are encouraged to articulate their thinking. Why did I make this choice? What alternatives did I consider? What am I trying to achieve? What am I willing to sacrifice? Now let's move to social constructivism, social constructivism, and parallel corpora. Social constructivist approaches recognize that translation skills develop through interaction, collaboration, and shared knowledge building. Students learn from peers, instructors, and professional translators in a community of practice. Parallel corpora using parallel corpora collections of source texts alongside multiple translations allows students to compare different translators' solutions to similar problems, understanding the range of possibilities and the trade-offs in translation. When you see three professional translators handling the same difficult passage in three different ways, you realize that translation involves choice, not just finding the correct answer. Now, let's move to talk about senses of pedagogical approaches. So, effective translation pedagogy combines theoretical knowledge with practical experience, encouraging students to develop their own translation philosophy while learning from established practice. Where workshop formats provides opportunities for multilingual cooperation, whether students working with different language pairs can share insights about translation challenges and strategies. Um, Collaborative editing exercises help students understand that translation is rarely a solo endeavor. Professional translators often benefit from editors, reviewers, and other collaboratives or collaborators who help refine their work. The goal is not to produce perfect translators and impossible standard, but to develop students' critical thinking about language, their problem-solving abilities, and their confidence in making informed translation decisions through repeated practice, feedback, and reflection. Students internalize the complex skills required for successful literary translation. Competence develops gradually through sustained engagement, not through sudden revelation or mastery of abstract principles. Now, let's move to learning activities and exercises. Translating with peer review, students translate short literary excerpts, perhaps a poem, stanza, a page of a dialogue, or a descriptive paragraph, and share their translations with Bear for constructive feedback. This activity develops both translation skills and critical evaluation abilities as students learn to articulate what works and what doesn't in a translation and why. Back translation games in back translation services and exercises. Students translate text from a language A to language B. Then another student who hasn't seen the original translates it back to language A. Comparing the original with the back translation reveals what was lost, added, or changed in translation, making visible the interpretive nature of translation and the difficulty of achieving perfect equivalence between languages. Back translation is humbling. You discover that even when you thought you translated clearly and accurately, the back translation diverges significantly from the original. This isn't necessarily because anyone translated badly, but because translation always involves interpreting and the transformation. Now let's move to creative writers for translators. Creative writing exercises help translators explore stylistic options and develop their feel for language by writing original poetry or prose in the target language. Students become more attuned to stylistic possibilities and limitations, making them better equipped to create literary effective or literary effects when translating. These activities transform but before that, we have to say that many translation students focus so heavily on the source language that they neglect developing their target language writing skills. But translations' ultimate goal is creating effective literature in the target language. You cannot translate well if you cannot write well in your target language. Creative writing exercises develop the literary sensibility and the stylistic range necessary for producing translations that work as literature. These activities transform translation from an abstract concept into concrete experimental learning. Students discover through practice that translation involves constant decision making, that multiple valid solutions often exist for translation problems, and that effective translation requires both analytical and creative thinking. The combination of individual works and collaborative review mirrors professional translation practice when translators benefit from feedback and editorial input. Even experienced professional translators rarely work in complete isolation. They consult with editors, other translators, subject matter experts, and sometimes even readers. Learning to work collaboratively prepares students for professional reality. So we'll stop here and we'll continue second session tomorrow, inshallah. Until next time, ta for now.